the Korean people have been forced, not out of choice, they have been forced into being self-reliant because of sanctions, because of the lack of international solidarity with the DPRK. They've been forced to look inward to be protective. Tell us a little bit about Juche, what exactly it is, and how it differs more or less from traditional socialism.
Yeah, Juche, it's a very interesting concept, and the way what you talked about earlier was very interesting about the Sino-Soviet split, the split between China and the Soviet Union. There was a tremendous amount of pressure for Kim Il-sung and the DPRK to go fully on one side or the other. And the DPRK understood that on one hand, that's wrong because on one hand, you need to maintain your independence. And on the other hand, it's also wrong because neither country is an enemy. China is not an enemy. The Soviet Union is not an enemy. And Kim Il-sung felt that while he disagreed with, say, Khrushchev and his lies about Stalin and changes to the Soviet economy, Kim Il-sung was against that and made sure that that wouldn't happen in North Korea. At the same time, he strongly disagreed with the policy that China was taking with this insane notion of Soviet social imperialism and these other ridiculous ultra-left stances that China was taking at the time. And the DPRK took a firm hand domestically against people within the party who were trying to put forward anti-Soviet nonsense. And on the other hand, this revisionist nonsense of trying to liberalize and so on. So they took an independent position. They maintained their close relations with the Soviet Union and China. And they always tried to bring the Soviet Union and China back together. That was something that they wanted. And they talked about how the division within the world communist movement only helps imperialism. And that's so true when you look around the world where you have conflicts in certain countries where you have the pro-China communists fighting against the pro-Soviet Union communists, and often China supporting U.S. imperialism around the world against national liberation forces, to the extent of even supporting the overthrow of Allende. Ridiculous, insane conclusions that they came to with this ultra-left nonsense. One very tangible thing that Kim Il-sung achieved in the Sino-Soviet split was these foolish Red Guards in China were stopping trains of Soviet aid to Vietnam, which is insane. These people are lunatics. They call themselves communists, and they're stopping aid to the Vietnamese fighting against U.S. imperialism. And Kim Il-sung convinced Mao to crack down on those Red Guards and make sure that the Soviet aid would go to Vietnam. From very early on, the DPRK took a very strong independent position, and this debunks the lies of that North Korea, Kim Il-sung, they were puppets of the Soviet Union or something. It's complete nonsense or of China, because the DPRK took a completely independent position and didn't fully agree with either Khrushchev or Mao, and they took their own position. They were always very extremely strong on self-reliance and independence. And needless to say, there's so many mischaracterizations of it. One that I think is obviously from more of a coming from a more legitimate place, not like the slander, but it's still a misconception of it, is that it's simply Korean socialism. Juche is actually more than just Korean socialism. It's more than just Korean Marxism, Leninism. It's actually a furthering of communist and socialist philosophy, and bringing it to a whole nother level of development, of scientific development. And some people criticize North Korea for changing use of the term Marxism, Leninism for Juche. And on one hand, some communists and people on the left say that as that's proof that they're not revolutionary anymore. And then some weirdos try to say, oh, that proves they're not really communists and they're nationalist, third positionist or whatever, blah, blah, blah.
I've even heard some ultras call them fascists.
Right, yeah. It's nonsense.
Right.
If you look at anything of what Juche is, it references heavily Marx and Lenin. It makes it clear. They talk of communism and socialism. They reference Marx and Lenin. Marx and Lenin are called the classics in North Korea. And they talk about the classics in North Korea. They're talking about Marx and Lenin. Marxism, Leninism, Stalin. Those are all part of North Korea's curriculum, what they teach children. They teach them that. It's not like they're trying to hide that in this bullshit about how, oh, Juche is Korean nationalism. It's complete nonsense. What it is, you know, from the Marxist perspective on Marxism, Leninism, communism is that it's a science. It's not a stagnant dogma. And the idea of what Juche is that it's taking the principles of Marxism, Leninism and developing it further. And for these people that are opposed to that, it's basically they're viewing Marxism as a dogma. It's a religion stagnant.
Right.
And what Juche did was it brought about new ideas that are now it's interesting because it can be kind of confusing to some people because the way Juche is described is that it's an original philosophy, but that's on one hand, but on the other hand it's rooted in Marxism Leninism, and it could not exist without Marxism Leninism. And again, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, their writings on Juche, they reference Marx and Lenin, and that's basically the foundation of it. But the reason why they came about with Juche was because they felt that there were certain shortcomings within Marxism, similar to how Lenin found some shortcomings within Marxism, and he brought it to what is Marxism-Leninism. And by doing so, and they say this all the time, they never reject Marxism-Leninism. Anytime they talk about Juche, they make it clear they're not rejecting Marxism-Leninism. And there's an excellent quote from Kim Il-sung on the topic. And again, for these fools who try to say that Juche is somehow Korean nationalism or something, this is what Kim Il-sung said about Juche. Quote, "The Juche ideology is based on Marx's principle, workers of all countries unite, and is in full accord with proletarian internationalism." That's Kim Il-sung on Juche. So it's fully in line with Marxism, Leninism. It's basically a further development of it, and it's not something simply like Korean socialism. It's a development of communist philosophy more generally.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's a great way of putting it, and that's something that people have to understand. Like, Marxism is not a static dogma. It's not a religion. It's a science that you adapt and mold to your national reality. If you're in Korea, you're going to blend Marxism and Leninism to the Korean conditions. If you're in Latin America, you're going to mold it to the Latin American conditions, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to adapt it. And a lot of the ultras who like to shit on DPRK and Juche, they don't really understand that. They don't really understand what it means to live in an impoverished global South country where you have to rely on your people. And when you're under attack by sanctions, it's something that's horrible. And DPRK continues to be attacked by sanctions. And for just some background as well, for people who are watching and listening for the first time, the Sino-Soviet split in the 60s, I think around 1961, between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, where you have in the Soviet Union the Khrushchev faction that became revisionist and became liberalizing the economy and started moving away from Stalin and Marxism, Leninism. But then you also have on the Chinese side, China moving in a more ultra left direction, adopting some more radical policies that were making, as Comrade Flame of Liberation was saying, painting the Soviet Union as a rising imperialist power. They would say stuff like neither Moscow nor Washington, no one is good enough, we're the only real revolutionaries. And a lot of the ultra left still use that kind of logic in their thinking. And so the DPRK and also Cuba as well were kind of like, I mean, Cuba I would say was more aligned with the Soviet Union, but like overall the DPRK was kind of like, look, we need to maintain unity. Imperialism, US imperialism is the main enemy. Wall Street is the main enemy. We can't lose sight and focus. And that's why I have mad respect for Kim Il-sung and the Korean Revolution, because they were always about unity, maintaining unity among the socialist camp, which is something that is so not often forgotten, you know.
It's correcting some of the shortcomings of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism, And what they felt was that, again, well, they uphold Marxism-Leninism, and dialectical and historical materialism, but they felt that there needed to be something talking about more so the nature of man. And what they emphasize is there's this slogan, man is the master of his destiny. And they talk about how man is a social being and he has creativity and has a strive for independence. And that's something that the significance of that is that while they're materialists, they also feel that there's something sort of missing in that while being materialists and talking about how humans are a product of like material conditions, they also state that man is not a slave to his environment, and that because of his creativity and drive for independence, he's able to determine his destiny, basically, and that so through that and you could see that sort of related to their history of fighting for independence, and how even though they were a small country, they fought and made they very strongly felt that even though they they had such difficult circumstances, and they had, for example, in the Sino-Soviet split, you had say much bigger powers sort of trying to pull the country on one side or the other. They felt that they're not going to be like they're going to fight and make their own reality. They're not going to be like a slave to the prevailing situation. They're going to fight to make the situation that they want. And so this is very significant because while Marx talked about like class struggle and all these things, that's extremely important. But also this concept of Juche, where the struggle for independence within humankind, man's strive for independence, that this is an extremely important part of human nature, so to speak, in general, and that class struggle and struggle for national liberation is related to this, and that it's the struggle for man's independence, and that this is one of the things that separates humans from animals, and that humans have this desire for freedom and independence. And it's very interesting. I would encourage people to read Kim Il-sung's and Kim Jong-il's writings on it, because I think that it definitely is. It is a very important development into socialist science, communist science, and it's something that, again, similar to how Lenin, he disagreed with certain things of Marx, and he sort of improved Marxism and created Marxism-Leninism. Juche sort of continues that tradition in the sense that it's rooted in Marxism-Leninism, but it also tries to improve it and strengthen it and build upon it to another level.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's something that is very unique to the Korean conditions, but just the language is like very affirming and upholding humans as the most valuable commodity, human life, human capacity. Unleashing the power of the human being and the spirit is something that can accomplish so much. And I think that's why it's cool that the red star, the one of the main logos of socialism, represents like the five fingers of the hand and the continents and the unity. Like, if you unite all of your fingers into a fist, it becomes stronger and you can accomplish so much more. So it's really beautiful to see that, just the level of philosophy, science, and poetry in the DPRK, their analogy, their understanding of Marxism and revolution.